Hello, everyone, and welcome to 9-Inch Charge. Welcome to the Old World show. We've got Jeremy back again. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks. Nice to be back on the show.
Feels like we were recording only 5 minutes ago.
Could say that.
Jeremy is back on again today to talk about his beloved Dark Elf army, and we're going to talk about the top units that we would like to see return in the Old World game, and also a little bit of wish listing at the end, something a bit out of left field that we would like to see. But just before we get into that, Jeremy, would you like to just talk us through why it is you love Dark Elves so much?
Oh, well, I can literally actually remember the love at first sight moment actually for me. I was in the Games Workshop Plymouth about 2001, and I was looking at one of those glass display cabinets where the cabinets sort of revolve around slowly. I was kind of looking for an army to start collecting because I've just got into the hobby. I'd been at my cousin's, we'd been painting some Bretonians. I thought, right, I'm going to go and get some miniatures. I was looking around thinking maybe the undead, maybe skeletons initially. And then this Dark Elf army literally revolved into my eye line, and it was the old 5th edition Dark Elves, if you know the pointy caps on all their helmets, and it was this incredible goth army of all purples and blacks on snowy covered bases with like really grey skin. Whoever painted it was an absolute master, and as the army sort of went past me, I saw like really cool spearmen and crossbowmen, and I thought, oh, and then there was some like Dark Rider style models, and then I thought, well, that's cool. I wonder if they've got something harder, like some heavier knights, and then knights on freaking dinosaurs went past my eye line. The assassins went past, and by the time this army had literally moved past my eyes, I was like, I'm getting them. So yeah, that's kind of a moment that sort of like stayed imprinted on my brain. I think I knew that I always wanted to do an evil army because I always think evil is more fun and more cool, but I kind of wanted an army that was quite disciplined and quite calculating. So when I looked at things like orcs and goblins, I knew I didn't want like an unruly football hooligan mob on the battlefield. I wanted something which was like going to be quite sneaky and stealthy. I guess maybe it also kind of goes back to that thing like we grew up watching Star Trek, and my favorite faction in Star Trek was always the Romulans, and basically they are evil space elves who are sneaky. So I think there's a lot of that there as well. But yeah, you got an army which is evil goths that have pirates, knights riding dinosaurs, ninja assassins, and bikini-clad elven ladies. I mean, it's got everything that a teenage boy could possibly want, so it's not really a surprise, is it really?
And I can remember that you played your army in a particularly Dark Elf style. I can remember there was a game that you played that was 2v2, and I think you were playing alongside Dan Cottle. And there was a turning point in the game where if you didn't come to the aid of one of his units, you were going to lose the game, but you were probably going to lose that unit. And in true Dark Elf style, you'd rather just just sacrifice them. I'm not having my unit die. We'll lose the scenario, but you're exposable or dispensable. I should say exposable. Talking about witch elves there, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, you did play it in that true kind of Dark Elf style, and I always appreciated how much you enjoyed the lore and all the different things that the individual units brought, and your painting was always leaps and bounds ahead of mine. And your army looked incredible.
Oh, thank you. It's I think I've seen some of your more recent models. I mean, I think you've definitely surpassed me. But yeah, your army to Sigmar is pretty damn good. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, Jeremy. But I suppose I've just been in the game longer, I suppose, is what it is.
Yeah,
I haven't had a break. And also because I think it's also because I work nights doing shift work. If you happen to be awake in the middle of the night, what else are you going to do? There's like, I've seen everything on Netflix 100 times. The pubs are shut, so I just sit and paint my models.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so shall we go through? So we've each picked a hero and 2 units to talk about today. So why don't you kick us off, Jeremy, with the hero that you've chosen to talk about, who you'd like to see return?
Yeah. So if you're going to talk about Dark Elves, there is only one real character that you absolutely have to talk about because he is, and there's a clue who it could be, he is pretty much the figurehead and almost a living embodiment of the entire Dark Elf society. He's just a boy that loves his mummy a little bit too much. Of course, we're talking about the Witch King, Malekith. I think Malekith is just a really amazing, cool character. The artwork, and I meant to look up the artist who designed. He did all the original 6th edition Dark Elf sketches. Just designed this incredible suited figure with these massively impractical antler style helmets, which I always thought must mean that the Dark Elf castle must have really, really wide doors, like to accommodate him. Kind of the same way that Daleks always have, go through sideways. I think Malekith might be like Daleks in the extent that he can only go through doors which are a certain size, built specially for him. But yeah, the idea of just this guy who's like literally had armor fused onto his body. It's like charred and blackened underneath it. Was very cool. Very Darth Vader-esque. And yeah, an evil male sorcerer / fighter. He was just awesome. It was always just a shame that Games Workshop never quite delivered a model that quite captured the mental imagery that sort of the prose and the fluff sort of conjured up. I think it's fair to say that the 6th edition model was a little bit clunky, but I'm sure they could do some amazing stuff with some of the newer sculpting techniques they've got now.
Yeah, I was going to say not yet.
Yeah, exactly, not yet.
Because even if they don't make him in the old world, I think they are going to bring him back in Age of Sigmar. I don't know quite what they're going to do with his relationship with Morathi in Age of Sigmar. I think they might just try and sort of paper over it a bit. I don't know if it's something that they will explore in the old world. I suppose it is still there. It is still canon. We are using the existing canon, so it's something that they probably will have to face up to. That they wrote it in the rules, or in the law.
I mean, even I don't know whether Games Workshop tries to be more family friendly these days, but even back in the day, they never explicitly said it, just heavily implied that they had an unhealthily close relationship with each other. So I'm sure it'll be left to infer. The camera will pan upwards as in the style of sort of traditional Hollywood movies.
I always liked Malekith. I always thought that he was a great character, like you said. So a bit of background for people who might not necessarily know. So Malekith is the son of the first Phoenix King of the High Elves, Anarion, who was the greatest elven hero who ever lived. And he wasn't to be Phoenix King. He went into the flames, but he was rejected, and he became all scarred and burned. Like you said, a bit kind of like that. Ended up looking a bit like Darth Vader after he was electrocuted. And his mother, who was very close to, as we said, sort of brought him back to life. And nurtured him and rescued him, and then his armor became fused to his body, and he became the king of the Dark Elves.
And there's also an interesting thing really about his journey from being a High Elf hero, someone who stood at the front of the High Elf forces and held back the tide of chaos, to someone who there's an interesting period in Malekith's life, which maybe it has been explored in some of the books, where he goes traveling after he's rejected and sort of explores the world, or like finds, I think it's a circlet of iron, like in some ruined chaos waste. And so there's an interesting idea here of what he found and what it was that corrupted him beyond Morathi whispering jealousy and poison into his ear. But yeah, you are talking about a character who initially was, one of the greatest High Elf heroes there ever was, who then takes a very dark turn and dark path.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if are we talking end times lore as well?
Well, I will let you lead on end times lore, as I'd checked out long before that and then heard various rumors and just snorted in derision. So you carry on.
So in the end times, it turned out that there were no true Phoenix Kings anymore. That what would happen is the High Elves, as part of their initiation to become Phoenix King, would have to be bathed in the flames of the Phoenix. But what they were actually doing was they were using magics and incantations to protect themselves from the flames and not truly going in there. And in the end, Malekith was able to go into the flames and become the Phoenix King that he was always destined to be. And at that point, oh yeah, after he went into the island of Ulthuan just crumbled into the sea anyway, so there was nothing of it left, and all of the elves went to Athol Loren, and the High Elves and the Dark Elves and the Wood Elves were all led by Malekith as one race back as they kind of started out being, and then the world ended.
So what you're basically saying is that the Dark Elves won.
Yeah, pretty much. And
Great.
Also, he married Alariel as well.
That's interesting.
That's just how they managed to sort of bridge the gap between getting High Elves and Dark Elves together and things like that. Which I think was it Tyrion who had the sort of the affair with Alariel.
That rings true. Yeah. I think
so he sort of done one over on him as well. He basically he just won basically in the end times. Just in time for the world to be destroyed.
Savor those sweet seconds of victory.
So what is it about him that you would like to see back on the tabletop? So obviously a brand new model, and looking at the new dragons that are coming out for the Stormcast, it'd be great to see him riding. You can see kind of what they can do and the motion and the presence they can have in those models now. It'd be great to see him riding one of those.
Yeah, I think the latest dragon GW has produced is fantastic. It's nice to see dragons which aren't quite so like a bent pipe. They always felt like a sort of like S shape, weren't they? With just some wings stuck on there. So we're now getting dragons with some bulk and some like muscle to them, which is really nice.
And I'm enjoying seeing different wings, because it always used to be you get a drag, no matter what you bought, you got the same wings, and they just fastened on the back of the model. Yeah.
Generic dragon wings 2.0, yeah, absolutely. So I think I kind of like to see, sort of a bit of a sort of meteor dragon than what we had previously, and I kind of like to see him with like a more elaborate, less clunky looking helmet, casting a spell. In my head, he's like got lightning or something crackling from like his gauntlet of power or whatever it was actually called, like mid spell casting, because I think that's the nice thing about Malekith is that he's a fighter, but he's also one of the most powerful magic users in the game, at least in the fluff, if never necessarily reflected in
and
the rules
really
itself.
Powerful anti-magic user, because he had magic resistance 2. Did he have magic resistance 2, or did he have a ward save against magic? But he had one of the two, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And his sword was able to destroy magic items.
Yeah, there was a really that was an interesting part of like the backstory of Malekith is that he was almost invulnerable, but was like destined to be destroyed by another male magic user, and that's the reason that in the Dark Elf lore there were only ever female wizards, because Malekith had banished all the male sorcerers out of fear that they would rise up and become a threat to him one day. So that's why he always had that vulnerability to magic, because it was the one thing that should be able to undo him.
Yeah, and there was no point attacking if he didn't have a magic weapon.
Yeah, but also he was incredibly vulnerable. If you had like a magic missile or like a Skaven, I don't know, warp lightning cannon, he was you could potentially pick him off quite quickly. But
yeah, his save went wild, didn't it? So he had a 2+ ward save against magic. Against non-magical weapons, but his usual save against magic was 5+, which for someone on a dragon clad in whose armor is fused to them, you'd think they'd have a bit more than that. Really, you get to 5+ just being on a barded horse.
That's where it's getting wrong. It's just his ego went to him. That's the problem.
Maybe it's because his dragon was made of Lego, Jeremy.
No, I'll have you know that the time that I use, so for listeners, because we were always keen to play games, didn't necessarily have the models either assembled or even owned them. So there was one time I think I played a game where I wanted to use a sorceress on a black Pegasus, and Lego does a fairly good small black dragon that's approximately the right size of it. So I just brought that in one day and shoved it on around a square base, and then went, there you go. And decades later, I'm still living through the ridicule, which I wholeheartedly deserve.
And actually, that brings us on to my choice, talking about a Dark Pegasus. So my choice for character was Morathi, who is the Hag Sorceress of Grond and first of the Hag Queens, mother of Malekith, and one-time consort of Anarion. She's the only witch elf who's a magic user, I think. All the rest of them were sort of priests, which I guess were bound spells, but she, in her own right, was a sorceress.
Absolutely.
And the reason why I chose her is because I don't know if you know, Jeremy, but in Age of Sigmar, there's a faction called Daughters of Cain, and Marathi leads that faction. And she's just gone like on another level now. She's just absolutely bloody bonkers. But she still is deceptive and poisonous, and she's deceptive even to her own followers. So they all believe that what they're doing is basically Cain, the god, was shattered and destroyed, and they're trying to find all the bits of him. So she has Cain's heart, and they're trying to find all these things. And she's telling the witch elves that they're trying to rebuild their god, but actually what she's doing is she's just using it all to further her own agenda and make herself more powerful. So she's the same as she ever was, I suppose. But I'd just like to see her from the beginning coming through to how she ends up now, I suppose.
Yeah, it's really nice to see that sort of like the same character and characteristics played off in her to this day. And yeah, because she was always labelled herself as the queen of the witch elves back in the old game. Not that she particularly cared about them. She just realised that they were a powerful faction. She wanted to control them. So she's always been this like political scheme who's been trying to outmaneuver people and just come up with these ludicrous claims to try and bolster her position.
It was always her and Hellebrand, wasn't it? With like the two
who hated each other and just had this like rivalry. But Marathi always had the upper hand because she had come up with the cauldron of blood, and therefore she had the secret of eternal youth, which meant that all the witch elves were always indebted to her, and they couldn't do without her.
And that had a rule that played out in the game as well, didn't it?
Yeah, so obviously depending on which edition you were playing, but generally speaking, it gave witch elves like an ability to like re-roll their attempts to wound, which when you're only toughened 3 is quite a good thing to have.
But wasn't she able to beguile her opponents or something? Was that a rule that we read earlier?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So yeah, Marathi always had the ability to like reduce the weapon skill of anything that was fighting against her, a bit like the Lamian vampires, if you remember their rules as well. Because she was always this incredible enchanting beauty. So yeah, I don't think I think Marathi's beauty was like she kept it, whereas the witch elves would sort of decay over the space of the year, and then they would regain it through a frenzy of blood and bathing in said blood and all that sort of stuff.
So yeah, I think I want her more for the narrative than anything else. But you know, as we said, I think the old model for the Dark Pegasus, to be honest, Jeremy, isn't far off the Lego one. If you look at the sort of how I think horses just took a long time for Games Workshop to get right.
Absolutely,
the legs were always a bit too fat and things like that,
and it was a nightmare because obviously we're talking about the days of metal, so the wings would always fall off, and I tried to pin those wings on about 4 or 5 times. It was an absolute nightmare. And even actually, again, the model for Marathi, although I think a bit better than the one for Malkith, it suffers definitely from the chunkiness that metal casting inevitably has. And again, you know, with some nice plastic sculpts now, you could get, you know, something which is far more intricate and sort of reflects a sort of more elaborate artistic side that elves should have. I
was just thinking of her playstyle. I think she sounds a bit like she could be a bit of a tar pit, really, because she had a ward save, and she would have had a good save by being mounted anyway. And then anything that fights her is at minus to its weapon skills, so she's difficult to hit. And then all the meanwhile, she's no slouch in combat, and she's casting all these spells around the place. I quite like to see that.
Yeah, it's weird actually to have there aren't that many all-rounder wizards that are good at, you know, as both magic users and fighters, as you say. And I guess that's where, you know, having a nipple out probably helps with the combat as well if you're going to distract the opponent and give them -5 to their weapon skill. But yeah, I think the other thing that is probably it'd been really nice to see her back in the game as well is that, in a way, if you want to go back to the Darth Vader like analogy we talked about with Malkith, in a way, it's all Marathi's fault. Marathi is very much the puppet master pulling the strings. Although Malkith has kind of like bent the Dark Elves to his image and his obsession with revenge and hatred, Marathi is the one that's kind of set him up engineered a large part of his fall and is the one constantly encouraging him and trying to manipulate him. So she is like, the Emperor from Star Wars to his Darth Vader.
Yeah, she's definitely a master manipulator. I can remember from reading my Wood Elf books, there was a time where Orion and Ariel went after her and they kind of got her held up in a tower, and basically Ariel was one step away from just getting Orion to like shove his spear through her and kill her. And then she said, "But what if I tell you all my dark secrets?" And then she corrupted Ariel to the point where she had to lock herself away for like generation after generation and not be seen by anyone. And even when she emerged, she was still tainted by all the darkness that Marathi had like poisoned her with.
That's really cool. And I think the other thing, like, if we want to talk about rules that I'd like to see for her is that, she is the sorceress who, helped, sunder Uthran. She's meant to be this incredible spellcaster, one of the first elven users. But actually, in game terms, Teclis was always better than her. Lord Croak was always better than her. So it'd be nice to have put her perhaps on, maybe not better than them, but certainly on a more even playing field than them in the future.
Yeah. All right, Jeremy, moving on. What's your next pick?
Well, I was trying to think of a sort of blend with what I thought really embodied Dark Elves in terms of like fluff, what was really cool models, and also had a rule set that really reflected, or that I guess game mechanics which reflected the background. I'd say because of that, I kind of went with the good old Witch Elves. Because not only are they sort of like such an archetypal dark elf unit, this frenzied, screaming mob of poisoned priestesses of Cain, but whenever you played them, they felt like that as well, because they had the frenzy rule, because they could sort of be baited into charging targets, because they could just annihilate anything that wasn't in full plate armor. They look and they play perfectly together. It's a great combination. It's a great combination of just rules and background fluff working really well. And I had endless fun seeing exactly how many were going to make it over to your lines, because obviously you were always targeting them, as rightly so. And obviously the lack of armor was often a bit of an issue.
Yeah, well, before the days of Arcane Bodkins and Matt Ward getting his hands on the Wood Elf book, it was impossible to shoot through Cold One Knights and things like that. So Witch Elves were the obvious target. And you're right, Jeremy. The rules did reflect the models. They don't have a lot of armor on.
Yeah.
But yeah, in combat, and also, yeah, as you said, Wood Elves are always famous for being lightly armored. There wasn't anything in the game. I don't even think the Lords could carry heavy armor. In later editions, they certainly couldn't. So if they were going to get into any, what are they going to do to unit Glade Guard? They're just going to like mince them up, basically, aren't they? They would be horrific. So yeah, they're always the thing I targeted first. Firstly, because of their save, but secondly, out of fear. I mean, in the lore, they do all these blood sacrifices and things like that, and there's stories of them like ripping out still beating hearts of their victims and throwing them into the fires. And then it says, but that's nothing compared to what they do in combat. That's where the real rituals take place. And
yeah, like we said, that was reflected in the rules every time. Like and you could do some great combinations. Obviously, the combination of poison was with when you're rolling so many dice, and I used to arrange them like certainly in 8th edition, 7 wide, because then you could get 3-4 attacks each. So it was usually 30 plus attacks. So that was a hoot. And then if you could then give things like the flaming banner, so they had flaming poison attacks, then you could do things like charge a help it abomination and sort of generally wipe it out on contact, which was always quite nice to do.
They're the kind of trope that I always really liked, to be honest. I think them when I did an episode about Wood Elves, I was talking quite a lot about War Dancers, so kind of a similar sort of thing. Not quite as ferocious and not quite as deadly as Witch Elves, but a similar sort of thing. But something that the High Elves actually lacked, I think. I don't think there was an equivalent in the High Elf army.
No, the High Elves, I guess, had we had the Sword Masters and the White Lions. So you had 2 really strong like tin can openers, with the great weapon attacks, but probably not a good unit to wipe out like low armor safe troops in the same way that Witch Elves were.
I suppose they just go back to your old favorite, the Bolt Thrower.
Can't go wrong with a Bolt Thrower. Why did I not pick that? I guess there's only other thing I want to say about Witch Elves is I think there should probably be an acknowledgement of the sexualization and the cliche of we're doing fantasy, we're going to have a woman in a bikini with two swords, and I do acknowledge that is slightly problematic, but I still have a soft spot for them. But I acknowledge that they are potentially problematic. But there we go. But let's move on from that.
Okay, so what's my choice? What did I pick? Oh, Executioners was the unit that I picked. So they are some of the deadliest fighters, you know, in the whole of the old world, really. They all worship Cain, and they all work in the shrines, I think, of Cain, and they wear this sort of ceremonial sort of garb that is just like really looks really intimidating. And compared to the Witch Elves, which are just all ferocity and hatred, I think the Executioners were all professionalism, and you know they tried to do everything with one clean, flawless strike, and they had a decapitating blow because they did actually work as executioners in the temple as well. They're like 50% executioners and 50% soldiers.
Yeah. They reflect if Witch Elves are the frenzy and hatred, then executioners are that sort of like cold calculation. And there's that feeling of like it came more across in the fluff, maybe, of like intimidation of dread when an enemy like saw their arm and saw their blades readied.
And we can't talk about them without talking about the FAQ that came their way.
Oh yes, so I remember very much. So just the background for this is that Dark Elves in 6th edition were, to put it mildly, not very good. And despite having fantastic, heavily armored models, that was not reflected in the rules, was it?
No, I mean, I'll put a picture up of an executioner so you can see what they look like. And the rules said that they had light armor, and of course, I always thought that was perfectly fine.
Nothing wrong with that. Perfectly enviable, in fact. But yeah, it was frustrating.
But there was an FAQ that came their way, and they were given the rules that they deserved afterwards.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I'd like to see them just as a counterbalance to the Witch Elves, and I always like that professional, like just absolute stone coldness about them.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I slightly regretted about 8th edition is the fact that I think the 6th edition models were so incredible, and I don't think the newer plastic ones quite replicated and carried across that look, just because they were trying to make a model that was also could be turned into Blackguard as well. And I think in that respect, perhaps they're not quite the newer ones aren't quite as nice as the older ones. Mind you, they also don't have to spend ages trying to pin the blades on, so you know you've got to win there.
All right, what's your pick next, Jeremy?
So I have to go with a classic, and it's the Cold One Knights. So yeah, like we talked about them earlier, you have elves riding on velociraptors. I mean, it's such a cool image. It's really visually striking on a battlefield and really unique. You want to talk about, you gave one the cliche of Witch Elf, and something which is very much like games that came up with and owned. Really powerful in the charge, really strong attacks, really cool lore of these elven nobility. So the Colder Knights were meant to be the aristocracy of the Dark Elves, and they've gone so far, they've given their lives to this sort of pursuit, to the fact that they ride these monsters which are actually poisonous to them. And in the lore, the slime that a Cauldron gives off gradually removes their sensation, so they get less and less, so they can't feel pain, they can't feel pleasure, so their nerves are slowly being destroyed by these beasts that they're riding on. But of course they don't care, because it lends them such power when they sort of charge into an enemy battle line.
If they don't fail their stupidity.
Yeah, and I mean, we can't not talk about the stupidity issue, which, although I like randomness and chaoticness, it did annoy me just that you'd have these like we said, these elite aristocrats, and they were just like looking at their stupid beasts drooling on the ground and going, why now? And it always was the most crucial moment.
I think they do have to bring a part of that into the game, though. Like,
yeah,
I think when goblins used to have sort of infighting and squabbles amidst their ranks and things like that, I just think that is really characterful. I think you've got a point with the Cold One Knights, though, to be fair to you. But Also, I mean, if you're going to cheat and bring dinosaurs onto the table when your opponents have got horses, you need to have something,
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got something a bit controversial to say about them, and I think you're going to disagree with me, and I think everybody who watches this will disagree with me. But I actually didn't mind the old Dino Cow ones.
Oh, that is controversial. Yeah.
In the day when you had them and everyone used to complain about them and they weren't how the aesthetic people wanted, I used to think, I don't mind them.
I always think that games, the knights that rode the Dino Cows were great, and I think maybe possibly better than the newer ones that replaced it. So I think the ideal would be for me the more Velociraptor style, but with the older 6th edition knights riding on top of them. Which, as I'm starting to repaint my Dark Elves, I might give that a go and see how that looks.
And I always just remember how incredibly devastating they were to anything they went up against. So, Jeremy, I remember you would always run them 3 ranks, and there'd be a hero in the front that had the power fist weapon that you got from the Albion campaign.
Oh yeah, the 40k, definitely not 40k magic items that sort of magic their way into the old world. Yeah.
So 3 ranks, and then each one would have unit strength 2, so 30. The most I'd ever take in a unit would be like 25 anyway. So they'd already outnumbered me before they obliterated me. And then they get the long charge, go in, wipe me out, and then straight away, no matter what unit size I took, I'd be outnumbered by a fear-causing enemy that beat me in the first round of combat. So I'd be fleeing, and you'd be rolling 3 dice to my 2, inevitably catching whatever fled, if it could even rally. And just wiping me out straight away. And I can remember game after game after game, I'd look at them and I just think, I know what's coming. I know what's coming. They got the moves to be able to pick their charge. And, even if they rolled stupidity for their charge, it wouldn't matter because the game is going to be played across 6 turns. So you're gonna get me eventually. No escaping.
I always used to hope that I would get stupidity on turn 1 because statistically you would likely only get it once per round. So if you get it outdone, I know this is not how maths works, but I used to think, well, if it happens turn 1, I might be okay for the rest of the game. It's funny, I'd kind of forgotten slightly about that, and now I just feel really bad hearing about how beardy I was being.
Yeah, but at the same time, we were just talking about Way Watchers into Witch Elves and things. Everything had to match up, didn't it? I mean, it was
absolutely.
It was a bit of a game of rock paper scissors in a way, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, just trying to. And I think if we're talking about like knights charging, then I think we should mention the Hydra banner, which back in 6th edition I think gave each model an extra attack. So instead of just having Colder Knights with 1 attack on the charge, they had 2 attacks on the charge, as did the mounts, and it was just insane. You could charge, a unit, a 40-man unit of skeletons, and just watch the whole thing disintegrate from the overkills dealt with it. It was good times. It was glorious.
All right, so my last pick is the Assassin. Just because, well, there's a couple reasons actually. I think the model of the Assassin that they made towards the end, the plastic model, carries so much motion, and I really like the look of him. I really like the play style. I like it. Just Dark Elves are just sneaky. I mean, an assassin killed a Phoenix King not too long before this game is going to be set, and I just love the idea of them and like just bursting out of a unit. You don't know what unit they're going to be in, with poisoned or magical attacks and things like that, and just going crazy and just wreaking havoc. I think they're just a great idea. And actually, in my Cities of Sigmar army, there is a sort of sub-faction called Shadow Blades, which harks back to the hero. And he enables you to take Shadow Warriors as your core unit. And I always take an Assassin because I just think they're great fun.
Yeah, I just want to echo pretty much everything you said. Assassins were just so characterful. The rules were so fluffy for them. The idea that you could just like play this game of where the assassin's going to be in this game, what unit could it be in, was always great fun. Yeah, and they were one of the models I think which made me think, yes, that's great. A hidden character who could pop out at any point, and that's what. Yeah, I thought, yes, I will collect these. It's a shame that they were never quite as good as they as you hoped they would be. They usually wouldn't be able to kill a character because they weren't quite quite have the strength to get through the armor ward, but I didn't care. I still absolutely loved them.
I think there was a cap on their magic items as well. It's like 25 points or something.
Yeah,
like
something
that.
like that. Yeah,
and they could never quite get those high level items that you really wanted them to have. But maybe they've got a chance now to right that wrong.
Exactly. That's what, if you're talking about what I'd like to see, I think something like that would be great.
Yeah, I think especially a low level character, if you had something like a sorceress or something like that, they definitely better chew through one of those, I think, even in the old game. But
yeah,
if you're going up against a 2+ armor save character or something, then yeah, they didn't have much of a chance. But they did have poisons, which that only helped you get through to wound, though, didn't it? It didn't actually help you get through your armor, which is always a weird thing, that your armor save would stick around against the poison. But maybe that's another change that they could make.
Yeah, I think that's the curse of being an elf player, isn't it? Really, that you didn't have a huge amount of units with huge strength to get through the armor.
Yeah, okay. So I think that takes us to the end of our picks. So I've asked you, Jeremy, to pick one magic item from any edition that you would like to see carried over.
So this was quite an easy one for me. I think it's got to be the Sacrificial Dagger. It's such a cool, fluffy thing that sort of really sort of captures the Dark Elf background. You have this dagger which the sorceress would use to plunge into the bodies of anyone nearby, and then drain their blood, and then use that to amplify and help her conjure more dark magic spells. It became a bit of a sort of a cliche that you'd see a sorceress in a unit of spearmen acting as basically a giant battery for her, and she would just sort of mow them all down, and then use these to get more and more power dice to cast more and more spells. But I always thought the blood magic, the fact that the Dark Elves were doing pacts with demons and that all this magic, which was incredibly destructive, and because it was coming for such a terrible cost, and so I liked that mechanic of death. You'd make a sacrifice and hope that you would gain even more from launching, I don't know, Anissa Powell's Black Coral or Chillwind or whatever it's going to be on the enemy.
I did always think when I saw that item being used, why are they using it on their own men? Because in all the lore they had so many slaves, and then sometimes they would let the slaves just say right, you're free now, and they'd run out into the battlefield just to get mowed down, or just to get in the way and things like that. And I did wonder if they'd ever create a unit of slaves for them, but obviously they were never made.
I think if we're talking about what might they do for Dark Elves in the future, I think there's a question about whether there is a slave unit. They've got captured humans and they just shove them out as cannon fodder, which would be quite cool.
I don't know, maybe I think though also maybe there is a point where a slave wouldn't really give themselves willingly, but a soldier might.
Yeah, absolutely. And thankfully Dark Elf spearmen were cheap enough that you could justify it in terms of points.
You say that, I mean, you're still talking about a millennia-old elf who's trained his whole life. And what did you do with your life? Well, I gave a caster +1 to their casting roll.
And then they miscast.
Yeah. Okay, so is there anything out of left field that you would like to see made for Dark Elves in this edition? I guess we've already mentioned slaves potentially.
I mean, slaves is an interesting one. I don't know honestly how I feel about the slaves, because it feels like you're heading perhaps more into sort of Skaven style of play, and that would, I guess, would be my slight caveat around it. But I think it's an interesting one to play around with. I think there's probably some things to be explored, maybe around the Beastmasters. The fact that they are in 8th edition, obviously you had the Beastmaster chariot, which was could fire a grappling net at a creature and then pulled them out of the battle line as it tried to sort of drag them away. So I wonder whether there's something interesting that could be done for the Dark Elves around that sort of hunting for prey. The other thing that I kind of quite like to see, because I always really liked the raiding theme of the Black Arks arrive, the Corsairs and Dark Riders swarm off hunting for villages to plunder and set light to and see what they could catch. So I wonder whether I would quite like some sort of ambushing rule, kind of a bit how the Beastmen would start the game coming onto the table at weird different sides. But I think maybe whether that's a special scenario the Dark Elves can play, where they launch an attack on a human village, but something that maybe sort of captures that sort of that raidy style would be quite cool.
So in your Beastmaster, idea. Would you like to see like different beasts that they could bring that potentially they captured in previous battles and things like that?
I wonder if it's either that or if it's some way of like if they're like going up against, I don't know, like a big monster, whether they can sort of like quell it with their mind, because in theory, like the beast masters were meant to have such like power and dominance in their like their eyes and their presence that like beasts would just like cower out of fear for them. So maybe that's like, I don't know, like the creature like can't attack them or loses its weapon skill or something like that. I just think that'd be, it's not like, it wouldn't be like a game changer, but it'd be quite fluffy and be quite interesting to see.
My wild card was also going to be Black Ark Corsairs. See something more with that, more to do with the Fleet Master and things like that. Maybe even I don't know. They sort of had their, like you already talked about the net, but maybe like a whaling harpoon and things like that they could bring on somehow. I don't want to get too much into the kind of the wackiness, because I know that Empire had that kind of land boat with wheels and things, and I don't think Dark Elves that kind of aesthetic suits the Dark Elves. But I'd just like to see more done with them. I mean, I'm not going to say that I want a Black Ark model.
I mean, that's literally a city, but yeah.
But yeah, something more with them I think would be great, because just who doesn't want Dark Elf pirates? Who doesn't want more of that? And also, I've just read a book, an Age of Sigmar novel that's got a Black Ark Fleet Master is really prominent in it, and they hunt this thing called a gyre shark that's got all like spines on it, and they've got all the different poisons to try and get in. They're spearing it with harpoons and firing off different things, and like it basically is so big that if their harpoons have got like cables on or anything, it's just going to pull the ship under the water. it's like ginormous. So things like that, I think I'd like to see more of stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's kind of thing. I know that obviously, I can't remember what they're called now. The Deepkin in Age of Sigmar, the sort of sea elves, but they kind of like played around with that theme, and it is an interesting theme. And there's more stuff they could do with that for Fantasy Battles as well. I'm sorry, the Old World as well.
Yeah, so I think that's that really. Just more poisons, more different kinds of poisons. But did they have different kinds of poisons before you could take?
Yeah, there were about like maybe about between 3 and 6. I mean, generally there were some old favorites that you used to use, like Manbane, which always gave you like your strength 1 higher than the target's toughness. So that was like a classic that used to be used like in 6th and 7th edition. And there was like a basic poison and like a killing blow style poison. But yeah, stuff like that would be fun. And I think, the Dark Elves all come from these different cities, don't they? And the where like there's a city for the Witch Owls and a city for the Executioners. So sort of seeing where where we can sort of like, I don't know, personalize an army from Garond or Nagarond or whatever it's going to be would be cool.
All right, well, thank you very much, Jeremy, for joining us today. I'd like to have you back to do something on Dark Elf lore, but I think we've got a bit of swatting up to do to jog our memories from 20 years ago lore and things like that.
It's been a little while, yeah, absolutely.
So, and also we're planning on having a game in the not too distant future where we're going to play High Elves versus Dark Elves. So that would be great to do, and just great to catch up, really.
Yeah, absolute bloodbath, probably.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I will hopefully catch up with you soon.